We are back on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network here on this Monday afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of Back to the Dugout, everybody. I'm your host, Toby Schulman, as always, here for our, second edition of our off-season programming here for baseball. Like I said, we were going to keep doing the 2 days a week baseball shows up until we really don't have any content to do it for. Obviously, right now, there is no shortage of content with free agency going on. And with everybody, it seems like in the realm of baseball and the baseball industry, making their free agent predictions. That's exactly what we have to do today here on Back to the Dugout. Now, I didn't take every single free agent, obviously, in the hour. I don't think I would have had the time to fully predict and outline where I think all of these free agents are going to end up. So I just took the most notable ones that I've seen other people go around and predict where they're going to end up. So shout out to a bunch of people on Twitter, Discuss Baseball, Robbie Hyde on YouTube, a bunch of other guys who have been kind of coming up with a pool of names that are just notable enough for the, content side of baseball creators to kind of just go ahead and predict where they're going to end up. So that's what we're going to do today. I've got over 30, I believe like 34 names that we're going to talk about. Among those 34 names are players like Willie Adames, Pete Alonso, Shane Bieber, Juan Soto, Alex Bregman, Corbin Burnes, Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty, a ton of names that are very familiar to all of you guys. And I don't think a single name here that at least won't be known by at least somebody watching. So a lot of notable names to talk about within free agency here. A lot of players that can make impacts on different teams. A lot of players that teams have to re-sign. And some interesting shakeups here in terms of how a lot of free agency predictions have gone, at least that I've seen. So a bunch of different predictions and also some predictions I am in agreement on. We will talk about all of that here, but I want to make sure we have enough time for all of this, so I want to make sure we can get right into it. So first guy we're going to get into here for, just alphabetical order's sake is Willie Adames because, when going in alphabetical order in terms of last names, he would be where we're at. So we're going to start with Willie Adames, the former Milwaukee Brewer here, and taking a look at his just overall percentile rankings from 2024. You could see he was well above average in a lot of the statistical categories here. Barrel rate looks really good. The launch angle sweet spot looks really good there. Bat speed's pretty solid. Walk rate really solid there as well with a 10.8% walk rate. But looking at his general stats, a 251 batting average in 2024, getting on base at a 331 clip and slugging at a 462%. To have an OPS of 793, a near 800 OPS for Willie Adames. There's a number of places where Willie Adames could end up, but I think he's going to be one of these shortstops that commands a bigger contract compared to a lot of the other players that we've seen. And you can see defensively, he's well above average as well. And, when it comes to sprint speed, he's sitting there right at the average kind of cutoff there in the 50th percentile. So there's a lot to like about Adames in terms of his game. And I think that's going to command a team to spend, 140, 150 million to him. And now you got to think what team's going to go out there and actually do that. And I think that's the LA Dodgers. I think this is a team that has been kind of talked about to have some sort of relation with Adames. And I believe the head of baseball operations with LA used to be with Tampa Bay when Adames was there as well. So there could be a bit of a reunion there. But looking at the Dodgers depth chart, and this is the projected opening day depth chart. And hopefully you guys can see that okay over my camera, but you can see where my cursor is kind of hovering over here. We have Tommy Edman as the projected shortstop for opening day and James Outman as the projected center fielder. If I'm the Dodgers, I personally want to move Tommy Edman out there to center field. I would sign Adames and get a really solid everyday shortstop and move Tommy Edman out to somewhere like center field where I think he plays quite a solid center field and it puts a really solid bat there rather than having a honestly just pretty bad bat that hasn't panned out in James Outman. I wouldn't be very surprised to see the Dodgers go this route and have, Willie Adames in the middle of this order. That would just be ridiculous. I don't think that Milwaukee's going to be shelling out the money for Willie Adames, so it makes sense to me. This is a guy who I just think he's been so good over the course of his career that he will command a very hefty contract. And at 29 years old, he's still very young. I think he could, command us anywhere near a 6-7 year deal. It's whatever the Dodgers really want. I think that would be a very good place to kind of get into with Willie Adames. He's a solid enough player where you could have him for over a handful of years and probably like the production you get out of it. So I really like Willie Adames and I really like the fit in LA. I think that is a very strong demographic for him to thrive in. I think he's one of those infielders that would do really well out there in the NL West. But moving on to our next pick, and I'm going to get his percentile rankings from 2024 loaded up here because it is Mets power hitting first baseman Pete Alonso. Now, Pete Alonso is a interesting case here in free agency going into this next season. Because after this postseason, I would have thought that the Mets for sure were going to want to lock him up to a long-term deal. While obviously his style of play is not the best in terms of when he's really off, he's really, really bad. But when he's on, he's really, really dangerous, which is kind of, why people like to buy into Pete Alonso a lot. You see the bat speed here is among some of the best in the entire league, ranking in the 93rd percentile there. The barrel rate is really high up there as well in the 89th percentile. But other than that, it's really nothing jaw-dropping in terms of, his underlying numbers here, and fielding is pretty much as bad as it gets. Now, do you want to pick up Pete Alonso to be a DH? Probably not. So you're going to want to play him at first base. And that sprint speed, obviously, for first baseman, doesn't really matter. But looking at his stats, and you could disregard all of these, metrics right here, but you could look just to the left here where I'm kind of highlighting. And I mean, a career in 6 seasons, 249 hitter. He does have a career 853 OPS, so he is a productive hitter. He slugs at a career 514 clip. So he hits the ball hard. It's really just a matter of, if a team's willing to shell out a lot of money for that play style. There are some teams who are willing to do that. And I think ultimately the team that is going to end up doing it is the New York Mets. The Mets are just going to be one of those teams to watch closely all offseason long in terms of who they're going to end up signing. Obviously, they're going to be one of the biggest names in on the Juan Soto sweepstakes. But if they don't get him, then they're going to have to go and allocate that money somewhere else. And obviously, not all of that money is going to be able to go to someone like Pete Alonso. So some of that money is going to go to him. Alonso recorded a 788 OPS, but the fewest home runs in a complete season in 2024 since his career started back in 2019. One of the biggest offensive pieces in the Mets, just entire lineup, getting them to that NLCS run. He obviously was very pivotal there in the playoffs, having a bunch of big-time, just big moments, big postseason home runs that are going to be remembered for a long time, at least not only by Mets fans, but by baseball fans as a whole. And I think, again, that's part of the reason why if the Mets don't get Soto, they're going to go and pivot towards a guy like Alonso, a guy that they've known to contribute for them in the postseason, a guy that stepped up for them, loves playing in New York, a fan favorite too. I mean, it just makes sense if they don't get Juan Soto and they have the money. I feel like they're going to go out there and they could probably get Alonso for a bit of a cheaper deal. Considering, you can look at some of his underlying numbers and his just, basic statistics from last year and be like, you weren't really all that good outside of the postseason, so we're not going to pay you as much. That could definitely be a possibility here. But there is the other possibility, and we're going to take a look at the depth chart here. Obviously, that's projected for opening day. But you could see Mark Vientos here at first base as that projected opening day first baseman. And I think that's a direction that a lot of Mets fans want to go. They like Vientos' style of play more than Pete Alonso just because he is more of an athlete. He's a better defender. He's not the best defender in the world, but he's a much better defender than Pete Alonso is. But then you've got Brett Baty here, who's sitting at the third baseman spot for the projected opening day starter. And I just don't really like that as somebody who has really watched these Mets prospects like Mark Vientos and Francisco Alvarez and Brett Baty develop. I don't think Brett Baty really has much of a fit here anymore. I think he would have found it this season like Mark Vientos did, and it just didn't really pan out for him. I think Baty is better off maybe being shipped off somewhere else and, getting a fresh start somewhere else. I think they should continue to utilize Mark Vientos at third base. Especially because if they don't get Juan Soto, I think they are going to go after Pete Alonso, and moving Vientos back to third base really just only makes sense there. Unless you want to maybe put Pete at DH or Mark at DH or Baty at DH. I have no idea. You got to also remember we have Luis on Acuna there, and then we have Ronnie Mauricio, who's going to be coming back from an injury as well, who had a lot higher upside than Brett Baty, and I'm sure he still does to a lot of fans in the world of Mets fandom. I'm sure a lot of them would want to see Ronnie Mauricio get his shot at least before Brett Baty does, after Brett Baty really hasn't done much with it. But next we got to go into a guy who I think is going to just sign right back with the team that he's been, and that is Shane Bieber. I think Shane Bieber has a lot of really good qualities still. Obviously, hasn't pitched in a long time. But when he did pitch in 2024, he did look really good. It was only a couple of starts, but he looked really solid and honestly very consistent. I really expect that to be the case if he does re-sign with the Guardians, which I expect to be the case. I just think no team is really going to want to get in a short-term deal with Shane Bieber at this point in time if he hasn't pitched in a long time. I feel like the Guardians are going to be the most likely team to take a chance on him, and I think that it wouldn't be that expensive for him. So I think it makes sense just for both sides. I think this is beneficial for Tanner Bybee. I think it's beneficial for a lot of these prospects like Gavin Williams and Joey Cantillo. I think having those guys be around Shane Bieber when he's in a full-fledged season and, in his full workload, I think that is going to be really beneficial for him because we've seen what Shane Bieber can do when he is healthy and when he's at his best. It's really fun to see. But, I mean, we could look at the Guardians' projected starting rotation for opening day. It's really not that special, and it's really nothing improved from what we've seen, especially this year. As you can see, Tanner Bybee would still be the one, Ben Lively, Gavin Williams, Cantillo, and Tristan McKenzie. So there's a lot of what-ifs here. I think there's like 3 what-ifs in this starting rotation, so having Shane Bieber there would really help. Only one lefty, but Shane Bieber obviously would be the frontline starter. So I wouldn't think, he necessarily needs to be a lefty to get himself a contract. He'll be, obviously just fine getting a contract just being Shane Bieber. But I think this is just a no-brainer for both sides. I think they were robbed of a season that could have been really great with him last year, and I think they want to see what they have with him this year and take it from there. So hopefully Shane Bieber can find something with the Guardians this season. But another player that I think is going to end up back with the Cleveland Guardians had a big role with them at the end of the season, especially in the postseason. And while he didn't pitch a lot in the regular season for them, this is a guy who's very familiar with AL Central pitching, and I think that he will be most beneficial staying with the Guardians. And I think that, again, this is a very beneficial deal for both of them. So Matthew Boyd, I think Matthew Boyd will sign back with the Cleveland Guardians. You can see he wasn't a qualified pitcher, but in terms of his percentile rankings, I mean, if he was, all of this stuff would look pretty good. I mean, he's well above average in a lot of statistics. From the left side, this would give them another lefty in the rotation that would provide, a little bit of instability for the opposing team's batting order if they had to go up against, righty starters and lefty starters the next day. That just allows Stephen Vogt a lot more to work with there. He had a 2.72 ERA in 2024. In 8 starts and 39.2 innings pitched with 46 strikeouts. So he honestly looked pretty good in the short time that he was with Cleveland this season. I think that in another full season, he can honestly provide something a lot better. While in 2023, he did have a 5.45 ERA and 71 innings pitched. I think the Guardians can get a lot better production out of him, and I think they were really happy with what they got out of him to kind of start with in this season in general. And, we look back at the question marks from the Cleveland rotation with the 2 prospects and Tristan McKenzie's health. Having a guy like Matthew Boyd, who's been solid in the past, who has given you good production, who has given you good postseason outings. I mean, this just seems like another no-brainer deal that could be just very cheap as well. I don't see, taking 2 pitchers on 2 very cheap short-term deals as a bad decision for them. I think this would give them a really good shot at not only getting back to where they were, being the ALCS, but it also gives them a shot to make their team better than it was last year, which could obviously get them a step further and winning the AL pennant and making it to the World Series, which is ultimately going to be the goal for Cleveland going in. But I think Matthew Boyd would be a good pickup for them. Obviously worked for them a little bit last season, so I think that could honestly pay bigger dividends this season, especially if he pitches more than 40 innings in the regular season. But we're going to pivot back towards a guy who won't be going to Cleveland, in my opinion, a guy that has played his entire career in one spot, and a guy who has honestly a bit of controversy around his name, and that is Alex Bregman. I just don't really sometimes feel like a lot of teams are going to go after this guy because of the old cheating scandal. That still is a thought that sits in the back of my head. But I mean, you see the numbers when it comes to striking out. This guy just doesn't really do it. A 13.6% strikeout rate, a 12.8% whiff rate, and then a 23.6% chase rate. This guy's a really solid and a very polished hitter, even in 2024 when that cheating scandal is long gone. Alex Bregman's going to command himself a pretty good contract in this offseason, and I think it's ultimately going to come from the Washington Nationals, a team that I have seen kind of be thrown into the ringer for Alex Bregman in the last few days. While I don't know how true or how likely that really is, I think this is a really interesting possibility, and I think that this is somebody that would really fit in well with this core group of the Washington Nationals. Alex Bregman, not necessarily the oldest player in the world, but he has a lot of experience being on World Series teams, being on a team that lost to this Nationals team in the World Series as well. This is a guy who I think would fit in really well in Washington. And just because they lost to them in the World Series, I feel like this would be a guy that wouldn't be, I guess not well received with the Nationals fans. I think they'd have a mutual feeling of let's try and get these guys developed here, and that's what they're going to be bringing in for. A 30-year-old third baseman is going to be brought in for pretty much nothing but what he can do on offense and how he could help a young core develop and grow as baseball players. Now, a two-time World Series champion would provide incredible leadership, like I kind of already hinted to. There's a lot of budding young players in this team that really just need the leadership. And that's guys like James Wood and Dylan Cruz out there in the outfield. But it's also guys like CJ Abrams at the shortstop spot who have seemed to gotten into some disciplinary problems earlier. Not earlier in the season, but really honestly later in the season. Abrams was seen out in the casino till I think 5 a.m. on a game night or a game day where they had to play at 1 or 2 p.m. and he was there till 5 in the morning. Having a guy like Alex Bregman there who's been in some trouble in this league already, who knows what it means to be in negative spotlight, I think can really be a bright spot to this team and can bring a real improvement to the mentality about the way that a lot of these guys seem to carry themselves outside of the field. And, the second that this team gets serious about that, they can start thinking about really opening a championship window, which I think is a time frame that's not too far out for the Nationals. They're looking to start winning again soon. They've got a lot of really good prospects coming up, a lot that have already came up. And, with the proper guidance, that could really just jumpstart a new generation of possible championships to come back to Washington, I guess, way quicker than they thought that would have happened. But that would be a really interesting signing there. We'll see what happens. I don't really know if Bregman's seriously going to go to a team like the Nationals or if he's going to go more to a contender like the Yankees or, the Dodgers or a team that wants another infielder. That's just an interesting thing to think of. But we're going to look at another pitcher here who may not be re-signed by the Dodgers coming into the 2025 season, and that is Walker Buehler. I actually have him going to the New York Mets, and I think this is a really interesting signing for the Mets if it happens, because the Mets rotation is going to look a lot different, and we're going to talk about that a lot through the show, and I hope that I have enough time to get through all these guys. So I'm going to start to try to fly through these a little bit more because we're already at 221 here, and I've gone through 4 of these. And I've got 30 more. So we've got a lot to get through, but I'm going to start trying to fly through these as much as I can. But it seems unknown if the Dodgers will re-sign Buehler or not, but the Mets could really benefit from having a guy like this in the rotation. While we saw him struggle at times with his consistency, especially in the postseason, I said multiple times on the show, in person, if you were watching baseball with me at all during the postseason, that there's multiple versions of Walker Buehler you could really get, and that's kind of 2 versions. The dominant 6-inning starter version with 2 feet of horizontal break on his sweeper, or there's the 6 earned runs version that's just not locating, not commanding well. And partly that's something we saw from Buehler that I don't know if it's going to make the Dodgers really want to sign him back. This is a very tight-knit relationship between these two teams, and this is obviously the guy that sealed the World Series for him, but I don't know if it's really in the cards for them to sign Walker Buehler, especially with some of these decisions that I think the Dodgers are going to be making in this offseason. So I think the Mets are going to tack him on for just postseason experience, just veteran leadership out of the rotation. I think that if you're spending money on an arm, this is a great arm to do it. A lot of upside if he is healthy. There is just the injury concerns, which could honestly save you a little bit of money too if you look at it that way. But I think this is a great arm for the New York Mets. And when looking at their rotation and the way that it's going to at least look right now, we got Kodai Senga, David Peterson, Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, and Joey Lucchesi. I should probably know that as somebody who worked for the Syracuse Mets for a couple of summers, but that's the starting rotation. At least it looks like for the New York Mets going into the 2025 season. And I mean, you could slate Walker Buehler probably is the number 2 in this, but we're not going to slate him in as the number 2 because I have another pitcher going to the New York Mets here. And we're getting into a blockbuster right now. I guess not a blockbuster in terms of, a trade. I guess it's like a trade term, but we're getting into one of the bigger names of this free agency, free agent time period, offseason. We're getting to one of the bigger names that will be most likely signed by another team. And to me, that is Corbin Burnes, who I think is also going to be a New York Met. Now, I think that this is just one of those players that if the Mets don't get Juan Soto, they're going to go after Corbin Burnes. This is just a player that they need. They need an ace, and you see that he has ace stuff. There's a lot of red here. If he could just strike out more batters, I mean, there maybe would not be a more elite pitcher in the American League right now than Corbin Burnes. We just have Tariq Skubal. But Corbin Burnes is seriously just been one of the best pitchers in the entire league for a long time. And by far, unless you think Blake Snell is, the biggest name on the market in terms of pitchers. Corbin Burnes is going to command a very large deal, and the Mets are among one of the few teams that I can actually see giving this amount out, especially if they miss out on like the even bigger names like Juan Soto, Anthony Santander. There are not many other ways that they could pivot to make a big splash, and this is how I think they do it. The rotation next year, like I said, if they don't sign Burnes, looks really, really bad. Given they don't re-sign any arms from their 2024 roster, adding a starter who recorded a 2.92 ERA in 2024, the Mets would have a genuine ace now to take the mound and take the pressure off of Kodai Senga, who seems to be a little bit injury prone as well. So this just seems like a great fit for both parties. The Mets get a genuine ace in Corbin Burnes, and they get to take a little bit of pressure off of some of their guys who are looking to have bigger and better years. And that would even take a lot of pressure off Walker Buehler, too, if they were to sign him, like I've been kind of hinting towards as well. So we look back at the projected starting rotation. That would then be Corbin Burnes, Kodai Senga, who else do we say? Walker Buehler, Paul Blackburn, and then, I mean, we'd probably have to get another lefty in there or something. So let's see if there's other lefties that maybe the Mets will work with towards the end of this show. Unfortunately, I will not give any spoilers here. But we got to talk about our first relief pitcher of the episode, and who else but one of the biggest names to be traded at the trade deadline. One of my favorite relievers this season to watch just because of how dominant he was in that first half. And I'm trying to get his percentile rankings loaded up, but for some reason, it's just not seeming to load here. That's fine. Either way, we're talking about Carlos Estévez, who I'm trying to still get this loaded up. So there we go. Yeah. All right. I don't know why that took so long. But Carlos Estévez, one of the better relievers in the league right now. You could see his walk rate is incredible. Fastball velo is incredible. But players tend to find the barrel of the bat, and that's why I think that, the better teams, the bigger contenders are going to stay away from him. And I think the teams that are looking to make a bigger push and to make a step forward are going to take more of a risk on a guy who didn't necessarily have the brightest moments in the postseason. And I think that's the Detroit Tigers. I think that this team, unless they want to roll out Jason Foley again as their closer, they should really pursue one in this offseason. Estévez is a great option as the Tigers now they now know that they really have what it takes to make a deep run in the postseason, especially with the core of young bats and Tariq Skubal-led pitching staff. They know what they have is something really special, and an A.J. Hinch-led group is always going to do better than you really think they are. So adding Estévez to the bullpen, I think, would make them that much more of a solid team. We saw what they did with the bullpen in the end of the year. They were really just working bullpen games phenomenally. and having somebody like Estévez would just bolster this bullpen so much more. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's just, are they willing to shell out the money for it? I don't necessarily know how much in terms Estévez will get if he's looking for a contract from a team like the Detroit Tigers compared to like a team like the Dodgers or the Phillies, but I still think the Tigers would be able to compete. Christian, I appreciate you, man. Go give a look out to Christian stuff. The Hurricane Watch, New Era Prep. I feel like I always forget to shout out Christian stuff, but I appreciate you, Christian, dude. Where was I? We got Jack Flaherty now to talk about, but Estévez to the Detroit Tigers. I think that's the best move for them in terms of going out and getting a reliever. But now we got to talk about another really solid pitcher in free agency, which is Jack Flaherty. Yeah, Christian, I am a good friend to you, aren't I? I'm going to throw that on there, actually, just so everybody can see that. But we got Jack Flaherty to talk about, who had a really big, I guess, not just breakout year, but I guess comeback year. He was really not good for a little bit, and then went over to Detroit, seemed to find something, and then went to LA, and obviously did pretty good there. Crumbled a little bit in the World Series, so I don't know whether or not teams are going to try and use that as a way to maybe get this guy for a bit cheaper. But I have him re-signing back with the Dodgers. I just think a Burbank native, he's going to want to stay out there in the SoCal, Los Angeles area. He seemed to make it known that he wants to be in this area as well. And I mean, there's nobody really blaming him. After being traded from there at the deadline, he recorded a 3.58 ERA en route to a World Series title. While it wasn't as good as his time in Detroit, it was still really solid enough to be the anchor of this rotation late in the season. This rotation just had so many injuries throughout the entire season, and I believe it's like 3 of their 5 starters going into next year, or at least the projected starters, were not even pitching last year. So signing somebody like Flaherty back is, I think, a must for them. But looking at the starting rotation for at least projected for opening day, Gonsolin, Ohtani, May, all didn't pitch last year pretty much. Glasnow got hurt at the end of the season. Yamamoto was on the 60-day IL. So there was not a single pitcher in this rotation that did not get injured last year. And I think when that's the case, you got to start looking at yourself and think, do we want Juan Soto or do we want a pitcher whose arm's not going to fall off? And that's what you're getting out of Jack Flaherty. While he might not be the best, his arm's not going to fall off. And that's pretty much good enough for, I think, Dodgers fans right now. He's a good enough pitcher who will give you great innings and will stay healthy. So I'm going to take a quick break here as we hit the middle of the hour here on Back to the Dugout. When I come back, we're going to start flying through 20 of these free agent predictions because there's a lot of them. But we've got about 30 minutes left here on Back to the Dugout. So I'm going to take a quick 2-minute break, and then we are going to get into these free agent predictions. So thank you all for watching and tuning in. If you are watching live, if you are watching the replay, I would appreciate it as well. You could just fast forward through the break. But I will be back in 2 minutes for those of you who are watching live. are back here in the bottom half of the hour here on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Back to the Dugout. If you missed the first half, we just outlined a handful of possible free agents, a couple really big name ones, but we've got, I think still over 20 to get through here in the second half of the hour. So we're going to start it off with a pitcher who I think is going to be going over to a division rival, which is pretty interesting to think about, but we've got to talk about that. Transitioning back over to the screen share, we have got Max Fried, and I think that this guy is going to be heading to the New York Mets. We talked about the Mets rotation a little bit last half in this episode, and we talked about how different it's going to look. And right now, I guess with the predictions that I have, the Mets rotation is going to be currently looking in 2025 to be Corbin Burnes, Walker Buehler, Kodai Senga, now Max Fried. And then we have, whoever they want to throw else in there, like Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, David Peterson. I just think this would give them a lot of depth. And I think if, again, they're not getting Soto, just throw a lot of money into the pitching, because if the pitching's really good, I mean, this team's going to go very far. I think the offense is going to take a step forward regardless of if they add bats or not. So I feel like the pitching's really where they have to be. And in terms of a pitcher, I mean, what else could you want in Max Fried? I mean, while, he doesn't have the best, whiff rate and chase rate numbers and swing and miss stuff, he doesn't give up hard hit contact, and the ground ball rate's phenomenal. The average exit velocity is really good as well. And I really think he's going to sign with the Mets. I think the Mets are going to make a push because they don't want him going back to the Braves. I think they know that a part of what's going to get them to the World Series is winning that division, and taking a big piece of the Braves is going to really help them out doing so, and it's just going to cost them a little bit. So we'll see if they do so. When will the Soto sweepstakes be over so the rest of the pieces can fall into place? I think that we're not going to know that until maybe January. He's a Boris client. I wouldn't expect, we'll talk about Soto a little more at the end of this episode, but I wouldn't expect the pieces to fall into, I wouldn't expect everything else to fall into piece before Soto does. I think that Soto is going to be one of the last people to probably sign to a team unless the Yankees give him an offer he can't refuse right away, which I just don't think is going to happen. But moving on to a player that is not really as thought about in terms of, this free agency, but is one of, just the better players in our recent memory in this generation. It's Paul Goldschmidt. I think he's going to the Arizona Diamondbacks here in free agency, and I just think that would be really cool. It makes sense to me because I just think that, you spend 8 seasons of your major league career with the Arizona Diamondbacks to start out. They could probably will lose Christian Walker on free agency. So I feel like it's going to be a lot cheaper to sign a guy who's 37 years old, who's still honestly a solid player like Paul Goldschmidt. It just makes sense to me. It'd be one of those cool victory lap things that I think both sides would really agree for. And I think he would be really good leader to a lot of the younger guys on this team. I think guys like Perdomo could really benefit from it. Alec Thomas could really benefit. Even Corbin Carroll could. This is a Hall of Fame bat at the end of the day. So when you're losing Christian Walker, there may not be many better options to really upgrade. So I think getting Paul Goldschmidt for a year or two could be a really good way for not only his career to go out, but for your players to develop as well. But moving on to another player but just a guy out west who I think probably should stay out west, and that's Teoscar Hernandez. I think the Dodgers are going to end up signing him back too. Just one of those, if it's not broken, don't fix it type of things. Teoscar came over from the Blue Jays to LA and just became an incredible player. He already was an incredible player when he was with the Blue Jays, but he really just elevated his game a lot en route to a World Series championship this season. Won the 2024 Home Run Derby and then won the 2024 World Series. So it was a pretty good year for Teoscar, and I could expect that he probably would be at least somewhat in agreement to wanting to sign back with the Dodgers. I mean, who wouldn't be, especially if they're going to go out there and sign guys like Willie Adames. They could obviously afford to bring him back. While he's going to be one of the pricier ones, I feel like he would honestly take somewhat of a pay cut to be on this team still. Career 263 hitter with an 808 OPS. He's not the biggest name in free agency, but he is a huge difference maker with this ball club. And I think that's what Dodgers and Dodgers fans have to remember, is that this guy was a real big difference maker to your team that won this season. Do you want to break up this core and try to start with something else, or do you want to keep what's already been working? And that's just why I said, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I feel like Teoscar Hernandez's home is in LA, and I think that's where it should stay. Jeff Hoffman is the next guy we are going to talk about, so I'm going to pull up his percentile rankings here. But I think Jeff Hoffman is going to be heading to the Kansas City Royals this offseason. I think the Royals are going to be shopping for an arm, and in particular, a bullpen piece. And I think that this is a guy who really fits in well. A 31-year-old who has really good swing and miss stuff. You see across the board there, the 96th percentile for every swing and miss stat, well above average when it comes to walking guys. And if he could just get slightly weaker contact, he would be an even more dominant reliever. I think this is a no-brainer move for the Royals to try and make. I think Estévez is going to be somebody that maybe prices themselves or gets themselves priced out of their price range when it comes to getting a guy like Carlos Estévez. But Jeff Hoffman, I think, while he may be similar in price, I think they could definitely work something out with Hoffman. And I think, he would be a better fit for their bullpen, given they do have Lucas Erceg as well. I think that would be a great 1-2 punch for them. And I just think he complements their bullpen already very well. He would be a huge impact arm just straight out of the gate. 2.17 ERA in 2024. He was great. He's just an incredible reliever. And I think if the Royals are looking for a shutdown guy out of the bullpen, not to necessarily close games, I think Jeff Hoffman's got what they need in that sense. So let's get into another reliever who, man, just really, I don't think a lot of people are going to be too happy to hear this, but we got to talk about Clay Holmes because he is a notable relief pitcher. He was an all-star. I think we at least have to talk about Clay Holmes, who is literally one of the best pitchers among all qualified pitchers at getting ground ball contact. And for his nasty sinker, I think he stays with the New York Yankees. I think he gets a 1 or 2 year deal. I don't think the Yankees are going to want to lock themselves into a very long-term thing with Clay Holmes, obviously. I mean, I'm not sure how many relievers necessarily do get long-term deals, but it's certainly not going to be Clay Holmes, at least I think. He's after losing that closer role later in the season, I don't think a lot of people would really welcome bringing Clay Holmes back. But Holmes still had a 3.14 ERA. He still had 30 saves. It was beyond a productive season for Clay Holmes. I mean, he was phenomenal for the Yankees. I know it makes a lot of Yankees fans' stomachs hurts to even just think about that. But I mean, when it comes to not pitching with guys on base, I mean, that's when this red stuff shows up. That's when he's getting weak contact, he's getting ground ball contact, he's working the sinker. So I mean, if the Yankees can get a cheap deal, their bullpen's going to look really different. So I feel like they should try and retain some arms from this World Series run that slightly worked. And I think Clay Holmes is really one of those arms. I mean, he was honestly really solid this season, even after getting moved from that closer role. He really was just being set up for failure there for a long time when he was going through that really, really, really bad rough patch. So I don't know. When we go back to Yankee fans really not wanting Clay Holmes, I mean, in that same regard, I don't know what teams really do want Clay Holmes after seeing the way that he kind of pitched in the middle of the season. So I think he's probably going to end up just getting re-signed by the Yankees here. But another player that I think is probably going to end up just staying put is literally the entire culture of the New York Mets with Jose Iglesias. You could say like the grimace thing was part of it, and I would agree with you. That was an awesome part of Mets fans' culture this season. But Jose Iglesias was really all it was. From the song to the concert in the stadium, I mean, he did everything to get these Mets fans rallied behind this team. And it helps when you're hitting 337 because that's what he did in his 291 plate appearances this season. He hit 337 with a 381 on base percentage and an 829 OPS. He was really, really good. I mean, he was not a qualified hitter, but you could see in terms of the swing and miss numbers, unless it was, chasing outside of the zone, he was really good at not swinging and missing and not striking out. So I think Jose Iglesias is going to be a bat that the New York Mets want. I think he's going to be a bat that is going to help guys like Luis Angel Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, if they have him up. This is a bat who's going to help them all develop really nicely. And I think, even the defense is above average. The sprint speed's well above average. This is a guy who's 34 years old and hit 337 last season. I think he's earned himself a contract. And if you're Steve Cohen, you got to make that happen because he's earned it. He's honestly the reason why you had butts in the seats for a lot of the season. So I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Just sign him back. He's awesome. He's awesome to watch. He's been a really fun player to watch his entire career, and I would love to see him back on the Mets because as a Yankee fan, I personally really enjoyed seeing the culture and the fun that he brought to this team. But next player we got to talk about is Yusei Kikuchi, who I thought was kind of going to be signing back with the Astros because of how good he did. But I think Kikuchi's going to try and capitalize on that good performing and go somewhere that I think just Japanese pitchers like to be more, and that's out west. And I don't know if that's wrong to necessarily say, but this is a guy in Yusei Kikuchi who didn't pitch well in Toronto, which I don't blame him. It's very, very far from where he's used to being in. And then he went to Houston, pitched a little bit better there. I think now he kind of knows he's in control of his own destiny a little bit more. And I think he is a San Francisco Giant. I think this is a guy that could really benefit from being in the San Francisco Giants rotation. I think they need a guy like him as well in the back end of their rotation too. If we're looking at their projected rotation to start opening day in 2025, it's honestly pretty good. Like if it stays healthy, I mean, this is a good, healthy rotation. Like Logan Webb, Robbie Ray, Jordan Hicks, and then Kyle Harrison should take a step forward. But Landon Roop there, I mean, you could definitely put a guy like Yusei Kikuchi in the back end of that rotation. You could stick him at the 4 and then stick Kyle Harrison there. If you want to throw a righty in and kind of mix and match, you have Hayden Birdsong, who's working through the minors still as well. Top 100 prospect there. I think Kikuchi's a great arm that they could throw in here. As you see, his swing and miss stuff's well above average, and his extension's good as well. The fastball velo from the left side is pretty, well above average as well there at 95.5 miles per hour. But I think he really just showed a lot of what he is really capable of with the Astros. And I think if he goes to a market that is more suitable for Japanese fans and just Japanese baseball in general, I think he will really succeed there. And I think having him in the NL West to go up against guys like Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, I think that would also only help him turn up his game a little bit more. And at 33 years old, he seems to be like maybe he's just in the entering the end of his prime, and we're just seeing the end of it here. And so maybe the Giants can get a quick short-term deal out of him. I don't really know. But he was solid with a 4.05 ERA. The numbers look a bit more inflated than how good he really was. I mean, he was really solid last season in 175.2 innings pitched. If he doesn't give you great numbers, I mean, he'll at least eat innings for you. He should stay healthy. I think that would be a really solid get for the San Francisco Giants. Moving on, we've got Ha-Seong Kim now, who I think is going to be staying with San Diego. And I think this just makes sense. His swing and miss stuff is just amazing. Here, I'll actually make sure that you guys can see that at least. There we go. He's got great swing and miss stuff. And obviously, 233 average is not great, but he still got on base at a 330 clip. He still had a 700 OPS. And I think just the fan base really likes Ha-Seong Kim. I think that this is a very good fit. And I think there's really no reason to go out and overpay somebody more when you have a guy who is solid and just works for the overall core of your team. I think it just makes a lot of sense, and I think it's going to be a cheaper option when San Diego has the ability to and should be spending that money elsewhere. So quick note about Ha-Seong Kim. I just think both the fan base and the team overall wants him back. But now we got to talk about a pitcher from the New York Mets last season, who I think is going to be making a trip out west, and that's Sean Manaea. Sean Manaea is going to be going out to the LA Dodgers, I think, just because they need a lefty. You saw the rotation. It was Gonsolin, May, Glasnow, Yamamoto, Ohtani. So only righties. They need a lefty. Manaea had a solid enough season, 3.47 ERA, 12-6 record, over 181 innings pitched. 1.08 whip. He's earned a big enough contract, or at least a contract from a team like the Dodgers, that I think is going to turn him into an absolute stud starter. The Mets were starting to turn him into one. His mechanics changed slightly, it seemed like, towards the end of the season. And I think they'll make him even better next year when he, if my prediction's right, goes to the Dodgers. Moving on to Jock Pederson, who I think will end up re-signing with the Diamondbacks. And, Robbie Hyde kind of talked about this in his episode of his free agent predictions. So if you're looking for more free agent predictions besides mine, go check that out on YouTube. He did a great job with that video. But in his prediction, he had Jock Pederson going back to the Diamondbacks as well. And I really agreed because Pederson's really had one of his most underrated seasons as an offensive player. In 2024, he hit for a 275 batting average, got on base at a 393 clip, and he had a season-high 908 OPS. The D-backs are going to be looking to improve from last season. Obviously, they didn't get the result they wanted, missing out on the postseason. They're looking to get back to a possible World Series appearance again, and re-signing Pederson as a DH gives you that postseason experience, that World Series experience. For a guy who had one of his best offensive years production-wise maybe ever, I think this is, again, a no-brainer and a great deal for both sides. Another deal that I think would be a great deal for both sides comes out of a starting rotation of an AL East team who I think could really benefit from picking up Nick Pivetta, who you could see here has pretty solid strikeout to walk numbers, near 29% strikeout rate to a 6% walk rate. He's just a solid middle of the rotation guy that I think could honestly really just slightly boost this Orioles starting rotation going into 2025. Looking at their starting rotation heading into the opening day, it's not looking good. Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez are both arms that I really like, but Dean Kremer's hit or miss, Albert Suarez is hit or miss, and then Trevor Rogers is one of my least favorite pitchers, I think, in baseball. Get rid of Rogers and just sign Pivetta, throw him into the back end there maybe. Could be an idea, but I've got another arm that I think the Orioles should get after as well after signing Pivetta. So before talking about that, though, we're going to have to talk about Jurickson Profar, who was one of the clutchest, if not the clutchest players in the entire major leagues. So I think he's going to command a pretty good contract, and I think it's going to stay with the San Diego Padres. I think Jurickson Profar, you see all of the just solid offensive numbers here, but not even looking at the percentile rankings. Let's look at the numbers at least above my head. 280 batting average, 380 on base, an 839 OPS, and 24 home runs on 10 stolen bases. This is a guy who has really just earned his contract with the Padres. A guy who loves playing in San Diego, got away from San Diego and came back, so I don't think they're going to let him walk away again. At 31 years old, I think that he's found his home, and I think he's going to be a Padre for the rest of his career. So I'm very excited for Profar. I really like what the Padres have building for them, and I think they're going to spend right this offseason. I think they're going to get some solid pieces, and I think they're going to retain the ones that they need to. But moving back to the Orioles, because I briefly mentioned that I had another arm for them. And let's take a look at this rotation one more time again while I load up the guy that I have him picking up. But, you can see Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Dean Kremer, Albert Suarez, and then, when we get rid of Trevor Rogers and throw Nick Pivetta in there, what does all of those guys have in common? They're all right-handed pitchers. So we need a left-handed pitcher to throw in the mix. Obviously, there have been some arms on here that I've gone over, like Max Fried, who is going to be more expensive, and I could see the Orioles maybe trying to make a splash on him. But I think this guy could honestly give him a really good season. I think Jose Quintana, he had a good season in 2023 and in 2024, and I think he could do it again in 2025. A 3.75 ERA in 31 starts. He clearly hit something strong with the Mets. While his, percentile rankings weren't great, the underlying numbers were great, and he went the distance in starts. He would go 6-7 innings. It seemed like, pretty frequently. So I think the Orioles could really benefit from a guy like Quintana, whether it's in the middle of the rotation, the end of the rotation. I think they could just really benefit from having just a solid arm from the left side like Quintana. And they do need a lefty. Like, let's be honest, they really do need a lefty. I just think Quintana's a cheaper option, and I think he is a guy that they really should try to focus on getting. So now they would have 4 righties and 1 lefty in Quintana there. So I think that would be a great pickup for them. I really do. But they have to get another bat. And if, they're not spending a lot on the pitching, which you could argue they really should, they should try to keep this bat because he is their best bat. If you want to argue Gunnar Henderson or Adley Rutschman, you can. This is their best bat, in my opinion. It's Anthony Santander. The switch hitting right fielder is not a very good right fielder. He's got above average arm strength, but in terms of power, he comes with no shortage of that. Anthony Santander was third in Major League Baseball in home runs hit in 2024 with 44 homers hit. That was third behind Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge. So that just kind of puts you in the kind of headspace as to how good of a power bat and a power threat Anthony Santander is. When you're thinking about this new ownership making a splash and making a big purchase, this is their chance. You want a guy, I would go after an everyday hitter, not a pitcher. I would go after a guy who can give you 40 to 50 home runs a year and not a guy who could, give you 30 starts a year. It's just an opinion that I have. I feel like if you're going to go out and spend the money, this is a guy who's going to command a pretty large contract and is entering this heart of his prime here. So this is a guy who I think is going to be hitting 45 to 50 home runs for the next couple of seasons. And I think if he's in Baltimore, I think he will continue to do that. And I think Baltimore has to realize that this is a guy that really has a lot to do with how, they win and lose games. So I'm actually interested to see how much WAR Anthony Santander put up, but I don't necessarily want to take up all the time. He put up 2.9 WAR last season, according to Baseball Reference. So definitely a name to keep an eye on for. But now we got to get back into the pitchers here. So we're getting into Max Scherzer now, who a lot of people probably don't even realize is still floating around the major leagues, but he is at age 40 with a 3.95 ERA. He's going to command a contract next year. Probably won't be a lot, but it will be interesting. I think the Atlanta Braves will pick him up. I just want to see Chris Sale and Max Scherzer in the same rotation. I think that would be really cool. Quickly, just looking at the Braves rotation going into the opening day in 2025. You obviously have Chris Sale and Reynaldo Lopez. You've got guys looking to take a step forward like Spencer Schwellenbach. You've got newly acquired Griffin Canning. And then Ian Anderson. So I don't really know where in the rotation Scherzer would fit, but it's Max Scherzer. So I think you would put him over a guy like Canning or Ian Anderson. Just a cool thought I had. I mean, there's not necessarily a reason or a big one as to why. I feel like the Braves would just do something like that. But moving on to another former Mets pitcher who really just had such a good comeback year, and I'm glad that he at least is going to get picked up by somebody, and that's Luis Severino. Severino has great fastball velocity, or above average fastball velocity, great average exit velocity when it comes to how he obtains contact, a pretty decent ground ball rate, hard hit rate, and barrel rate as well. But a 3.91 ERA in 31 game starts. He was perfect, or not perfect, but just everything you could kind of want Luis Severino to be after the year he had with the Yankees, especially. I think this is just a really good arm for Houston to go after. I think the Astros should add Sevy to the back end of their rotation. I think he would fit in really well with guys like Ronel Blanco and Hunter Brown and Framber Valdez. I think that this would just be a guy that would really fit in the clubhouse there. And I think you're putting him on a team that could compete as well. I think that's partly where, Sevy gets part of his competitive edge to kind of go is when, he's on a contender. So stick him on a team that is looking to improve upon how they ended their season last year. And I think you're going to get a really similar season to how he performed this year. But moving on to Blake Snell, and then, we're just gonna run through these as quickly as I can here because we only got 3 minutes. But I think Blake Snell is going to go to the San Diego Padres. It just kind of makes sense, and I'm going to steer away from the percentile rankings and everything just because it's taken a bit too much time. But we're going to have all these out in article form so you guys can obviously see my thought process behind all of this in a more, cohesive manner. But Blake Snell, I think, goes to the Padres. The relationship seemed to work out well last time, so I think it's going to work out well again. Winning the 2023 Cy Young. He just didn't pitch, his like best in San Francisco. I think that was just because that was just kind of a dud of a deal to begin with. I think he goes back to San Diego, and I think he performs near Cy Young level caliber again. And I think he helps push this team further than where they were last year. So this is the big splash I have the San Diego Padres making, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think they realize what they lost with Blake Snell leaving, and they'll try to take him back. But moving on to Tanner Scott, I think he signs with the San Francisco Giants. They're in need of a solid relief arm, and Tanner Scott provides exactly that. He got the first taste of playing out in the NL West with San Diego this season, and he could very well stay out there if the Giants are willing to pay. In 2024, he recorded a 2.73 ERA with a 10.6 K per 9 rate. One of the best relief arms in baseball. It would just be a huge signing for the Giants. But I can see a lot of teams like the Yankees, the Mets. I could see a lot of teams buying in on Tanner Scott. Not even a lot of teams that are contenders either. But if you are a contender, you should probably be looking to sign an arm like Tanner Scott. But one of the players I wanted to make sure we got to was Juan Soto. I think Juan Soto re-signs with the New York Yankees. And bottom line, I think the culture is just too much to get him away from this. I think they'll stop being cheap. They realize how much of a difference maker Soto is to this team. Don't overthink it. Don't be cheap. It's not what the boss would have wanted. You got to go out and you got to give the players money that are going to win you games, and that's what Juan Soto does. If Juan Soto wants to play in Queens and rack in money and not win anything, and he could very well win something with the Mets. So I'm not going to say that and then have people come back to that clip. But if he wants to win with the Mets, a team that has far less culture than have his shot at being in Monument Park taken away and having his number up there with the greats like Babe Ruth, Derek Jeter, and Mariano Rivera, if he wants his number up there with the likes of Seaver and not Ruth, then, that's, hey, go get paid. I can't be mad at a guy for wanting to go get paid, but I can be mad at the Yankees for not wanting to pay him. So I think they will pay him. I think this is a guy where this is a once in a lifetime player. You pay him when you get him, and they have him, and they know that this is what it takes to get to the World Series. So in terms of the other free agents that I had, there's really not many other big names on here, so I'm just going to kind of run through them. I think Gleyber Torres is going to end up going to the Toronto Blue Jays. With Soto re-signing, I don't think they have enough for Gleyber. I really wish they did, but I think the Blue Jays are going to pick up scraps kind of like they did with IKF. I think they're going to pick up Alex Verdugo too, but I just don't see both of these guys really signing back. I think both of them could provide great offensive jolts to the Blue Jays order, and I think that not being in New York will honestly help them a lot, being out of the spotlight like that. So I guess Torres, Verdugo, both wrote those guys in there. Blake Treinen, I think, could end up at Philly just because their bullpen's going to look a lot different. I think Treinen would be a great get for them with a 1.93 ERA in 2024. Christian Walker, I think, gets picked up by the Yankees. I think with no Anthony Rizzo, they're going to need a really solid first baseman. I think he's a cheap option. Was really snubbed out of an all-star appearance last season, and a great defensive player, like one of the best defensive first basemen in the league. I just think that's a no-brainer for the Yankees. Get a good defensive player and a great bat in Christian Walker. Tyler O'Neill, I think he goes to the Cleveland Guardians after having a great comeback year with the Boston Red Sox, getting on base at a 336 clip and hitting 31 home runs. I think the Guardians will look to put him in right field and maybe replace Will Brennan there and maybe have some more power come out of Progressive Field. Verlander, I think he could go back to the Tigers. Kirby Yates, I think they could go to the Mets, both a couple pitchers that are just getting up there in age. But Verlander would be cool to have on the Tigers to give Skubal and Reese Olson and Casey Mize and Jackson Jobe a bit of leadership and a bit of help. I think that would be really cool and beneficial, so I could see that helping. And then Kirby Yates could be a big bolster to the Mets bullpen. But sorry to kind of be very brief about those few free agents at the end there. Just to address this comment before I end the show, though, I mean, I don't think that's too long of a deal. 12 to 14 years for someone who's 26 is fine. This is a Hall of Fame player we're talking about. This is not, I'm trying to think of somebody who just isn't even close to the level of Soto who's going to command a big deal. I mean, this isn't like we're signing Trevor Story or somebody that is just injury prone who's going to command a big check. I mean, this is literally just one of the best baseball players of all time. I don't care how much money this is. I want that player on my team. This is one of the best overall hitters we will ever see in baseball. He hits for more power when he's on the Yankees. He needs to be on the Yankees. 12 to 14 years, whatever he wants. I don't think there's much argument there. I mean, I would be happy. Like, I'm happy to give him that. I mean, he's earned it. Like, I don't think that's too long of a deal at all. I really just don't. 12 to 14 years, I think, is a perfect amount of time. I get over a decade of Juan Soto, and honestly, probably like 2 of those seasons are going to be pretty mediocre as well. If those seasons are going to be mediocre, he's still going to be hitting at an elite clip when he is 40 years old. Uh, Max Scherzer is 40 years old, and a team's going to pick him up, like I kind of just talked about earlier. But love talking about, obviously, the Soto sweepstakes, and if that has to be an own episode of its own, I mean, I'm sure that will be. But I appreciate everybody for tuning into the free agency prediction episode. First time I've done like a themed episode like this in a while, so I'm actually very excited that we're getting back into that. Like I kind of hinted at earlier, I think Thursday, I think I talked about this at the end of the show. I want to try and get a top 100 prospects list. I was looking to put that out this week, but honestly, that's just not happening. So I'm thinking I'm trying to get that out like around after the time MLB awards come out. We're going to recap the prospect watch list that I did at the beginning of the season, before the season even started. We're going to recap all of that, and I'll have all of these free agent predictions in article form, hopefully, by the end of the night. But that's all I got for you guys today on the show. We'll be back Thursday to talk more baseball here. Hopefully there's more news and more free agent signings that have happened that we can kind of recap. If not, we'll find something else to talk about, and we'll hopefully just have more news in terms of free agency. But that's all I got for you guys today here on Back to the Dugout. Make sure to tune into all of our other content here on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network. Christian shows, Robbie shows, Drew show, Defo show, AJ stuff, Joe Q, Chef Tom, everybody. I mean, we all put out great content here on a weekly basis for the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network, and that's how it's going to be here for at least the foreseeable future for me. So thank you guys always for watching. If you're watching the live, watching the replay, I appreciate it. Let me know if you disagree with any of these predictions, or if you have any thoughts of your own in the comments. I'd be happy to answer those. And follow me on Twitter at @TShulman_Report. Send me a DM if you have any other questions. But I'll see you guys back here on Thursday for another episode of Back to the Dugout. Have a safe rest of your night, and I will see you guys back here in a few days.